Welcome to the Filmlings Podcast,
a bi-weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is episode 63, Hepburn vs. Hepburn, round 3, Stay Alive.
Stay alive. There's a reason we're podcasters and not professional Broadway performers, Jonathan. And do you know why that is?
Because we cannot sing.
I was going to say because we didn't grow up in New York and I wasn't involved in theater, but also, yes, because we can't sing. That's important. That's an important part of it.
And we know a lot more about movies than musicals.
We do. There's something that appeals to me about the immortalization of a permanently captured moment in film over the spontaneity of an ephemeral moment in theater. Not to say that one is necessarily has any more intrinsic value than the other, just that subjectively I like one more than the other. But that's not really what we're talking about today. Really what we're talking about today, for like the third time on the podcast, are the Hepburns, our favorite leading ladies from film history. And as always, I am hashtag Team Katharine, and Jonathan is hashtag Team Audrey. And I just want to point out before we dive in to anybody out there who is new to using the hashtag Team Katharine hashtag, that Katharine is spelled with two A's, not an E after the TH. So just reminding you out there, all of our Team Katharinites out there, to remember to spell her name correctly as we go forward. So thank you very much for that. And turning our attention towards the films today, Jonathan, what are we talking about?
Today, we are starting off with The African Queen from 1951, directed by John Huston, starring the one and only Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart. At the Oscars, this film won for Best Actor, was nominated for Best Actress, Best Director, and Best Writing.
And then we'll be talking about Charade from 1963, starring Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant, another fan favorite of the filming show.
I was thinking about it. Cary Grant may be our leading actor as far as number of times he has appeared.
Also, he's just in everything. That's kind of his thing. Like, that's kind of his deal. And it's one of those things you don't notice when you're first getting into classic film, but as you watch more and more of them, he will just pop up. He'll pop up in all of them. And I've noticed...
Not something to complain about, ever.
No, he's great. He's a very distinctive actor. He seems to have, for people who haven't seen a lot of his performances, his signature accent almost seems one note or like a one-trick pony, but it's really not. It ends up being very versatile. He can bend his like signature charisma to a lot of different kinds of roles, and very strong roles to lend a lot to movies. And I've noticed that as his statistics have gone up in my Letterboxd and analysis statistics page. And for those of you who want to follow us on Letterboxd, go ahead and do that. Just plugging ourselves. You know how we do. Anyway, Charade stars Audrey Hepburn as well, and she's the focus of our episode today. It is was directed by one Stanley Donen. And it was nominated at the Oscars for Best Original Song, and that song was also named Charade.
Indeed it was. Two great films, two great leading actresses, and two great leading actors. Shall we get into it?
Certainly. Okay, on to our first film of the day, The African Queen from 1951, and this is a film about a boat named The African Queen, which is kind of just our setting for the majority of the film, or at least, the important middle bit of the film.
Yeah, kind of bringing it back to like Lifeboat and other bottle episodes that we've done.
Yeah, and in fact it takes place in Africa, along, I feel like I should know the name of the river, but I don't, but that's okay. It's in East Africa, it's near Kenya and Uganda and Rwanda, that area, if for those of you familiar with the geography of Africa. And it starts off with these two missionaries, a brother and a sister. These are the Sayer siblings. Katharine Hepburn's name is Rose, and her brother, played by Robert Morley, is the Reverend Samuel Sayer, and they are missionaries out here in the less populated areas of Africa, kind of during the early 19th century, or during the early 20th century. I still can't tell whether or not this movie is set during the First or Second World War. Oh, I can confirm right now. This movie is set during the First World War. So the early 20th century Africa missionaries out in Africa doing their thing with a local village, and they have their mail and packages and supplies regularly delivered to them by one Charlie Allnut, which is a wonderful name, Allnut, played by Humphrey Bogart, originally meant to be a Cockney character. Humphrey Bogart couldn't do a Cockney accent for an entire movie, so it was changed to a Canadian, and hence we have Humphrey Bogart in this film as well. And the missionaries kind of look down on the rougher ways of this male boatman, ferryman, if you will, running around the river. He's dirty, and they stay as clean as they can out here in the less populated areas of Africa. And the movie really gets kicked off when news arrives that war has been declared between Britain and Germany, and the missionary village is deserted except for Katharine Hepburn and her brother, who stay behind. It's actually
kind of raised, but
it is eventually, it eventually is raised. Like, they stay behind, they choose to stay behind, and then it is raised by German soldiers who come along and beat up Katharine Hepburn's brother, who then takes ill, has a fever, and dies. Humphrey Bogart's character returns and helps her bury her brother, and then they decide to leave because why the hell would they stay here? So they leave, and Humphrey Bogart's character is mostly interested in just leaving, and Katharine Hepburn's character is mostly interested in turning the boat, the African Queen, into a live torpedo and sinking the German gunboat that is guarding the river downstream that blocks their exit. So she kind of has like this revenge, patriotism thing going on, and Humphrey Bogart starts off kind of more or less out for himself. And of course, they go through a series of trials and tribulations as they go down the river, which is a really great metaphor for a plot, especially in the second act. So if you're studying how to structure a second act, check out this movie. It does a really good job of it. As they go past a German fort and a series of rapids, and the boat takes on damage and more and more damage as they go down the river, and the relationship between the two develops first into a friendship and then into something more than a friendship as they proceed down the river and are essentially put through the shit together, which in my opinion has always been a good way to develop a friendship with a person. And eventually they make their way to the lake, which is guarded by this gunboat, and they finally make their way onto the lake. And I won't spoil how it ends because it's still fairly early in this episode of the filmings, and even though we're terrible at keeping our promise of not spoiling things, I want to wait at least past the 10-minute mark to just spoil the crap out of it. But suffice to say, it is a golden era film from the height of the studio system, so it ends about the way you would suspect it to end. But the director, John Huston, who is a bit of an outsider in the world of Hollywood, especially at this point in his career, kind of takes it through some unique twists and turns, which makes it memorable, and is one of the things that helps it get up there on the AFI Top 100 list.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a better way to showcase two giant Hollywood stars than to stick them in a tiny little boat and just throw the worst that the nature of Africa can at them. And that's exactly what we get to do. We just get to follow these two characters going from these distant strangers from two different kind of social classes, and then as they form bonds and have to help each other and get through all of these things and just survive together. And it's really, really great character study in that respect.
Yeah, and they both get something that they need from the other character, which is just good writing.
Yeah, classic opposite attracts kind of thing.
Yeah. As Katharine Hepburn's character learns to loosen up, at first she does it maybe too much as she goes on her crazy revenge bit, but she learns to loosen up, and then Humphrey Bogart's character learns to develop a sense of attachment, which you can derive from the fact that he's a single man running a boat around Africa at the start of this film that he wasn't really attached to much. A sense of attachment as well as a sense of responsibility, not only to his love interest throughout the film, Katharine Hepburn, but also to his country, and at this point his queen. They're part of Canada's still part of the Dominion. To have a little bit more of a patriotic bent towards the end, which he's kind of lacking towards the beginning. Which brings me around to part of the very interesting production facts and stories that we can talk about in regards to this film. And part of it is that this is a film that came out in, oh gosh, when did it come out, Jonathan? It came out in 1951. Yeah, this is a film that came out in 1951, which is, for those of you who don't know, right around the time of the McCarthy era. And most significantly about that, the Blacklist in Hollywood, which is a series of events which culminated in, I think, about 12 various writers, directors, and other people being blacklisted from Hollywood by the House of Un-American Activities Committee in Congress, which was led by, or maybe it was in the run to Senator McCarthy. Anyway, the point is there was a bit of a witch hunt going on at the time for suspected communists, and a bunch of people got pushed out of the industry. And a lot, one of the things that happened during part of that was a lot of major stars, both directors, writers, actors, actresses, were going to go to New York to show their support. And some of the people who did that were Humphrey Bogart, Katharine Hepburn, and John Huston, who directed this film. And afterwards, they thought they were just supporting their fellow coworkers and colleagues through a rough spot with the government, but it turns out that it put a bit of a target on all of their backs. And even though it wasn't as strong as the people who were directly targeted by the Blacklist and HUAC, a lot of these people who went to go support them kind of backtracked a bit. And did a lot of projects that supported patriotism and traditional values, and the allies from World War II, especially the non-Russian allies from World War II, hence the African Queen. So this was a movie that was done partially to get back in the good graces of people like HUAC and the studio heads in Hollywood who were scared of people who were being targeted by HUAC at the time. And hence we have a lot of themes of faith and traditional patriotism and stuff of that sort seen throughout the movie, as well as an interesting story to kind of lend to the start of the making of this movie. And if you want to hear more about that, go check out the You Must Remember This podcast episode number 74, episode 4 of the Blacklist series itself, The African Queen, Humphrey Bogart, Katharine Hepburn, and John Huston, which goes into much more depth and the juicy details of that story in particular.
Yeah, but once we get into the film itself, once it does start getting made, there were a lot of things that went on like during the actual production of the film, because this film was actually shot on location in Africa for a large part of it. Not everything. A lot of the things are, very dangerous, like pushing a little river steamboat down Whitewater Rapids and all that kind of stuff.
Which is actually, by the way, it's not even a real boat. It's a raft with a boat construct on top of it.
Oh, really?
So that they can take away parts of the boat and to get the giant Technicolor cameras in there.
This is like the boat version of a cardboard cutout Western town.
Essentially, that's what's going on there.
Yeah, but there were a lot of sections that actually were shot on location, which, like you're saying, they were shooting this film in Technicolor. This is the first color film that we've done on the podcast with Katharine Hepburn. And when Technicolor was first getting off the ground, those cameras were huge. So shooting on location, especially in a country like Africa, was not an easy task and was not a common thing. And as you can imagine, it came with all sorts of its own complications, i.e. Fake riverboats getting thrown down the rapids.
Yeah. Apparently the boiler on the boat almost fell on Katharine Hepburn, like it was a near miss at one point, and that would have been pretty bad. Like nearly the whole crew and the entirety of the cast got sick. Even there's one part early in the film where Katharine Hepburn is playing an organ, and the rumor is, and I think it might have been confirmed in her own autobiography, but she had a bucket next to her on set while she was shooting the scene so that she could shoot as much of the scene as possible and then pause to vomit into the bucket and then resume playing. Humphrey Bogart would go on to brag later on that he and John Huston were the only ones not to get sick during the shooting of the film, and that was because they didn't drink the local water. They only drank like the whiskey that they brought along with them.
That's funny. Yeah, and I guess kind of semi-related, but getting back into like a specific part of the film, there was a scene at the very beginning where Humphrey Bogart has dinner with Catherine and her brother, and they're both missionaries and very prim and proper representatives of the church. And then Humphrey Bogart is the gruff, rough and tough guy who sits down, is kind of eating and trying to be proper and everything, but his stomach starts gurgling and doing all of these, making all these noises. And it reminded me of the scene from Modern Times where Charlie Chaplin is sitting down next to the pastor's wife, and they're drinking tea, and both of their stomachs start gurgling, and they just kind of have this whole scene with looks between each other, which I think we discovered was one of like the first flatulence jokes ever in film. And that scene in this movie kind of is almost like a culmination of that many years later.
Yes, and another one last fun fact before I really dive into Katharine Hepburn's acting and performance in this film, and that is about London's feral ringneck parakeet population.
Here we go.
Yeah. It's not like a long story. There's not a lot of details about specifically how it happened, but it's just
so bizarre.
Yeah, there are some zoologists who have kind of come along and given some significant credence to the story. Apparently one zoologist whose parents used to feed the ringneck parakeets when they were a child. But it is it's both a rumor, and there's a lot of credit to that rumor that the population of ringneck parakeets that now exists in London and has existed for some time is because they were accidentally released or escaped from the shooting of this film, which shot all of its on-set scenes in a studio that was in London, England. And the parakeet, for those of you who don't know, is not a bird that is native to London. But it
so if you were wondering how cinema affects ecology, there you go.
Yeah. So, but it is now because, probably because of this movie. So if you've ever wondered if you've ever been in London and you've been looking at a ringneck parakeet and you've been wondering to yourself, why is a parakeet in London? Well, you could just have to thank Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart. But yes, there's those and many more interesting facts about this movie. I hope all of you enjoyed the trivia that I ran on my page the past couple weeks. It was just kind of an idea. Please let me know what you think about it. If you have a moment, we would love to keep doing that sort of thing to keep you guys entertained in between episodes. But before we move on from this movie, we have to talk about Katharine Hepburn's performance in this film. And the first and foremost thing that I have to talk about, and it's not a bad thing, it's not a stigmatized thing, is just the fact that Katharine Hepburn is kind of over the hill in this movie. She is past her young starlet phase for sure. She's playing an old spinster in this film. She's not quite as old as her character in this film, but she would go on in the next coming decades after this to play many, many older films, and her career wouldn't really fade until like the late 80s. She plays a much more mature character. She's much older, but she's just as commanding, just as romantic, just as charming, just as signature, charismatic Katharine Hepburn as she was in her past roles. Just with an older, more interesting spin on her that you didn't typically see in a lot of studio era films that didn't focus on older women as leading love interests, which I both find fascinating and highly rewarding to see one of my favorite actresses in that role. Not only because it is a unique performance in its own right, but also because it means that her establishing herself as an older actress, which is something that is next to unheard of in studio Hollywood, transition from a young starlet to a successful older actress, meant that she nearly doubled her career length of successful films that we can still enjoy to this day.
Yeah, especially after being blacklisted.
Well,
but it's also
not really fully blacklisted, more of like threatened.
Well, yeah. But still, there was a stigma there, and we talked about the whole box office poison bit. But it's interesting to see her character transition through the three films that we've talked about in this series with Katharine Hepburn, starting with Bringing Up Baby, where she is just the full-on whirlwind of comedy, to The Philadelphia Story, which is still a comedic film, but in which she is, for the most part, one of the less comedic aspects, because she's got this very dramatic character arc that she has to go on, into this film where she starts off as the very stoic and prim and proper character, and then has to literally get her hands dirty in a lot of different situations and learn to relax and trust this man that she knows very, very little about. And so it's kind of, these three films are kind of an epitomal maturing process in a sense, especially for just seeing how her character evolves with her age and how she's able to take her technique and her talent and adapt it for so many different types of roles, and how she just nails each one of them.
Yeah, no, it makes my Team Catherine heart happy to see her thrive throughout all of her career and play like a wide range of roles. Certainly a wider range of roles than most actors ever get the chance to play in their lives.
Right.
And she has the talent for each of them. So always fascinating to watch. I love to watch her, and I'll probably keep watching Katharine Hepburn movies for, well, ever. So
yeah, because I mean, she's still comedic in The African Queen, but if she brought the same kind of comedy that she brings in Bringing Up Baby, the movie would be completely different.
Yeah. And I even watched On Golden Pond this week, which is over 30 years after The African Queen, and she's still sparkling and alive.
Is that her last film? That's one of her last films,
it's
right?
one of her last films. It's the last film she wins an Oscar for.
Okay.
But she's still crackling and alive and just as charismatic as she was in any other movie. It was Henry Fonda's last film, though. And his daughter Jane Fonda is in it as well. So that's a fascinating movie to check out in its own right. Do recommend it. But now is not the time for On Golden Pond. Now is the time for Charade.
All right, Charade, one of my favorite movies. This movie comes out in 1963. I'm going to try and skim the plot because if you were concerned about spoilers, Alex, I am walking on a minefield here. So the basic premise of Charade is Audrey Hepburn's character, Regina Lampert. We get introduced to her, and we find out that she's unhappy in her marriage, and she's planning to get a divorce from her husband because he's keeping so many secrets from her, and she doesn't know if she can trust him. And then we find out in the next scene that he's actually dead, and he had stolen a bunch of money during World War II, and a bunch of his war buddies that he stole the money with are now coming after her because she thinks that he has the money that he stole from them, that they all stole from the Germans. And that's not even the most complicated part, because she also runs into Cary Grant's character, Peter Joshua, and kind of gets tangled up in him. He's kind of tangled up on all sides with everybody. But through this, and then Walter Matthau was thrown in there also as a CIA operative, and there's so many angles going on that makes this just like a great spy thriller, but it's also a great comedy. And one of the things that I love about this movie is the way that it can switch on a dime from being like full-on rom-com to full-on Hitchcock suspense film. And it's kind of amazing in the way that it's able to do that. Kind of like what we talked about with the 39 Steps, where you have screwball comedy meets like with really high stakes, like death as the stakes. But it's still two characters, a man and a woman, going through this adventure and falling in love in the process.
Yeah, no, it is full of twists and turns. It is, whew, it's something. It's very, and the thing I continue to think every time I watch this movie is just how Hitchcockian it is in terms of plot.
It's so Hitchcockian.
And like avant-garde, very dramatic style, in the terms of like that 40s, 50s thing that Hitchcock had going on, and even early 60s, that we talked about so much, and how it influenced like the French New Wave artists and so on. And those techniques, those theories and those styles are on full display in this film in terms of like the bright colors, the technicolor, the dramatic
shadows,
the shadows, the way characters are introduced.
The Cary Grant.
Yeah, there's Cary Grant in it. That makes it Hitchcockian, right? Almost, you're right.
Yeah, but it's just it's so well done, and it's so much fun. Like, you can tell that, you know, Cary Grant, Audrey Hepburn are having a really good time doing this. And you can tell that Stanley Donen has a real love for Hitchcock and that type of film. You know, Cary Grant came off of North by Northwest not too long before this film came out, and this film is very North by Northwest-ish, with Audrey Hepburn being the wrong woman, if you will. And I'm going to pull out all the stops from our Hitchcock series, because why do we do a Hitchcock series if we can't bring it up when we talk about Charade?
Yeah, why didn't we do... What other reason did we do a 5-week Hitchcock series for, if not in prep for this week's episode?
This film right here. Kind of the only Hitchcock trope that this film is missing is a blonde, honestly.
I feel like there's a blonde in there somewhere. Maybe not a main character, but there's got to be a blonde person, a blonde woman in there somewhere.
There probably is.
There you go. Yeah. There's your task for the week, people. Go scan the background extras for a blonde woman.
Send us a screen cap. First one gets,
nothing.
I don't know, a Twitter shout out.
A sense of accomplishment.
There you go. But yeah, one of the other things that this film does really well, and that it needs to do really well because, again, the plot is so complicated, is the way that it reveals information. And it's constantly revealing new information and refuting old information that it's already given us. And so it's really important that we are both interested in the information that is being revealed and that we're not getting completely lost, because there are so many twists and turns. And one of my favorite things, one of the greatest scenes, is the very beginning scene when they're at Audrey Hepburn's husband's funeral, and we get introduced to all the bad guys. And they all walk in and they do some form of testing, but in their own very specific way. You know, the really mean guy comes in and he sticks him with a pin. And James Coburn, who we saw in The Magnificent Seven, comes in and puts a mirror up to his nose and talks to Audrey Hepburn in his southern drawl. And the I don't know, the bald kind of Peter Lorre-ish character comes in and just has this like weird sneezing fit because he's so strange. But just by going through all that, we don't even know who they are, but we kind of get a sense of how they're going to play into this. And then when we find out that they're all working together, it's like, okay, now it's kind of a force to be reckoned with. And then we get to Walter Matthau, who goes through the exposition scene, but we've got a context for all of the characters that he starts referencing when he brings out old photographs and just kind of talks us through each of the characters. So there's just a lot of different ways that the information reveal works, and one of them is the information receiver, which is usually Audrey Hepburn, as she has to kind of figure out what is going on. And her role in this is so great because she is at once terrified and utterly charming in every scene that she is in. And she can go from being completely interested to just being completely distracted. So like in the Walter Matthau scene, he's explaining stuff to her and asks her if she wants a sandwich, and she's like, no. And then once things get tense, she stops him and goes, can I have a sandwich actually? And so you get little bits of humor thrown in with all of the suspense.
Yeah. And I don't know why this suddenly reminds me of this other movie, but it reminds me of The Lady Killers in the way this team of
Coen
people
Brothers Lady Killers?
No, the old version with Michael Caine. Yeah, where in the way this group of people is kind of like thrown together, and they're a little incompetent and they're very amusing to watch. But the take on this one is definitely drama thriller rather than comedy in The Lady Killers. Not to say that either one is less fun to watch, because they're both very fun to watch. I mean, just the style and panache, which whenever we're talking about Audrey Hepburn, of course we have to talk about style. I mean, she just brings gobs of it to everything she's in. The sheer amount of style is perfect for this movie. It makes it entertaining, it makes it fun, it makes it go down easy, keeps your eyes on the screen, which is perfect. That's what you want for a film. And of course, to extrapolate from what I just said, the casting of Audrey Hepburn is perfect. She fits in this role absolutely perfectly. The way she can just incarnate innocence within herself in like every film she's in, regardless of the truth behind her character, is perfect. The way she can pull off style and confusion, and some it's deeply hidden, but you can tell there's this whip-smart intelligence deep within each of her characters, and it only shows to the people around her and the audience in very particular moments, and it's very, very, very well done. I don't know if it's necessarily intentional or if it's just part of her natural charisma, but it just works. It works very well.
Yeah, and it actually comes to play a part in this film when she starts spying in her own turn on Cary Grant, and she remarks to Walter Matthau that women make the best spies/agents, and she gets to kind of she has this pride in herself of how good she is at pulling tricks and being sneaky and all this stuff, and that's one of the great things is her dynamic with Cary Grant, as she flip-flops between trusting and not trusting him over and over and over again through the course of this film. As new information is revealed to her, she will literally go from sitting in his lap and kissing all over his face to being stone cold towards him for the entire next scene, because she just learned something else. But she's able to do it because you can see her thinking and her emotions on her face, and she just embodies that elegance, but she can also bring it to a more serious film like this.
Yeah, and there's this interesting thing she does where her voice is just completely high, but that highness can either be, the high pitch can either be complete innocence or complete seriousness or complete complete seductiveness, depending on what scene we're in.
But it's never dotty. Sometimes you think of a high voice for a woman as blonde or unintelligent or whatever. She has that high voice, but it always has purpose behind it.
It almost lowers the audience's defenses to prepare them for the full-on emotional onslaught of her acting, which is great. I mean, bravo. That is great for what you want to do as an actor to make the audience feel and follow and feel empathy with you as a character.
Yeah. And talking about the dynamic between Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant, we have to talk about the age difference, which really does not come across on screen. Like you just kind of believe them and love watching them, but they are actually 25 years difference. Cary Grant being the older, obviously. And Cary Grant actually had a problem with this. He had a problem with it for a while because he turned down the leading role man on both Roman Holiday and Sabrina, which are two of Audrey Hepburn's early hits. And he had huge objections to their age difference. He didn't want people to think of him as a cradle robber or whatever. So parts of the script were actually rewritten to make Audrey Hepburn's character the pursuing character, where she is constantly trying to get him to be in love with her as opposed to the other way around.
Which makes for a slightly more interesting script, I must say.
Which does. And it fits Audrey Hepburn's character because she almost turns into, to keep it in the series, she kind of turns into Katharine Hepburn's character from Bringing Up Baby, where she's chasing Cary Grant, and Cary Grant is just trying to keep up.
We got a Cary Grant movie with both of them. Oh, yeah,
we do. We got them both. He's making the rounds. I'm telling you, he's all over this podcast.
In everything.
But yeah, it's and it's not that he is. There are times when he kind of distances himself from her, and we understand that, especially by the end, even though they do end up together. Spoiler alert, I can spoil that much. But it does kind of help, and I think that it may have felt a little different and would have been a little bit more creepy. And honestly, I don't understand how it would really work given the characters if Cary Grant was the pursuer in the relationship.
It would have made him like really, really evil. Like,
yeah,
I mean, like he's
manipulative
he's not a squeaky clean character by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
Nobody's a squeaky clean character in this movie, and that's just part of what makes it interesting. But if he had been the pursuer as well and been like this really sexually aggressive man, it would have made him very hard to be sympathetic with.
Yeah, I think regardless of the age difference, just like you're saying, given the characters, it would have been a completely different movie, and you would not have felt as happy about the ending as you do.
It puts some of the power back with Audrey Hepburn's character, and that power balance is kind of important to a film, so that you don't feel, you feel like both characters are actually acting in it, like they have agency, and that you don't feel too much sympathy towards either one, or too much, or don't feel enough towards another. Right.
And a couple other little tidbits about the movie. Alex, did you catch the My Fair Lady reference in the film?
I might have, but I think I've forgotten. Jonathan, what is the My Fair Lady reference in this film?
There's a moment when they're walking up to Audrey Hepburn's hotel room, and Cary Grant says, "We're here," and she says, "Where?" And he says, "On the street where you live." And it's just like a little wink and a nod. And another fun tidbit, if you would like to know more details about this, since we're talking about the plot more vaguely, is that you can watch this whenever you want to, because it is in the public domain due to a kind of freak legality thing. When the film was released, the copyright statement...
Freak legality.
The copyright statement on the film did not include any word or abbreviation or symbol for copyright, and so it just went into public domain as soon as it was released, because of the way that the copyright laws worked when the film was released. So I'll include a link to it on the Internet Archive in the blog post, and have at it. It's kind of just the little bonus about this movie. It's such a good movie, and then for one little technicality to just make it available to the world is so interesting.
Yeah. No, it's funny how that stuff works out. It's always a weird path for films to get through, especially to the viewer, especially when you extrapolate that out over the course of decades, which work well with it. Makes for interesting stories, and heck yeah, put more films in the public domain. I want to watch them.
Yeah, we've talked about film preservation before, but I don't think we've talked about film unprotection before, or however you would classify that.
Yeah. Making films readily available, either in affordable cost or no cost to the public, especially to the just oodles and gobs of people who are aspiring to make similar content, whether it be actual films or less shorter content, videos, yada yada yada. But I think one of our tenets, even though we don't have those, we don't list them anywhere. Maybe we should, as the filmlings, is that watching movies is one of the best ways to learn about movies and learn how to make your own movies better. You see how to do things, you hear how to write things, you see how to direct things, light things, move the audience, what makes you feel certain ways, even just getting down to the fact of having a diverse amount of content and creative people behind that content who make things in different ways to show you and teach you, give you different perspectives, different ways to do it, and ultimately to learn what you like to do in your own right as a creative person, to tell your own story in your own way, in the way that you want to, which honestly will probably be a mix of all of the things that you've seen. Because if you hadn't seen anything, you probably wouldn't be able to make anything. Even the famously isolated filmmakers that we talk about, like Tarkovsky, have seen something, or they wouldn't have anywhere to go off of to begin with. Not to say that complete originality is impossible. It's just that everything comes from something.
Yeah. And I mean, even like we talked about a couple episodes ago, even if it's just picking a movie that you really like Orson Welles did with Stagecoach, and just watching it over and over and over again, so it really seeps into you and you can really figure out how it works. If you're having trouble accessing movies, this is a good one. It's free and it's available. And if you want to know how to make Hitchcockian movies, learn from someone who made a Hitchcockian movie. This film is actually often referred to as the best film that Hitchcock never made, which I cannot refute at all.
Like, it makes sense, right?
It's perfect. But this film was actually remade at some point by Jonathan Demme, who directed Silence of the Lambs. Is called The Truth About Charlie, and from everything I can tell, it's not very good. But it is a fun fact. It stars Mark Wahlberg, too, and I cannot see Mark Wahlberg replacing Cary Grant
it stars Mark
in anything. Yes, it does. In 2002.
Look, I'm as much of a Marky Mark fan as anybody else, but he doesn't hold a candle to Cary Grant.
Yeah, no. So there you go. Fun fact about the longevity of Charade. It's actually surprising that it hasn't been remade more than that.
Right? Although I it's not like I'm supporting remakes. I don't want this to come off as me being like, remake all the things, because I don't necessarily agree with that.
Yeah, it's just based on understanding of how Hollywood works. You'd think
there will always be remakes.
There will always be remakes.
There will always be infinite remakes.
But yeah, as we move into the overall notes of this episode, and I guess overall notes for this whole series also, as we finish up our talk and comparison, but not really comparison, just two separate gushings over Hepburns. It was really interesting to see these two wonderfully talented actresses that share a last name, and how they're able to bring a very different style and a very different personality to so many different kinds of films. Like, they're both so good at what they do, but they don't have the same appeal necessarily in all the same circumstances, but they bring their own personal appeal to each of their projects with such force that they just cannot be ignored in film history.
Right. And by the way, real quick, because this just popped into my head, I just remembered it. Just for those of you who are wondering where the Katharine, not really a beef came from between me and
Hepburn
Jonathan.
Versus Hepburn. You said
Hepburn.
Katharine versus Katharine.
Oh, well, I'm biased, so...
Clearly.
Hepburn versus Hepburn beef came from... it goes back to me not knowing whether or not the two are related. Like, this predates the filmings. Over a year and a half ago, I was trying to figure out whether or not the two were related. And I did I spent hours and hours trying to figure out whether or not there was a relation, and I couldn't find anything to confirm it. And it still stands that they're not related. Maybe if you go way, way far back, they were. In fact, probably every human is. But
they both have European nobility in their blood, but that's about the closest you can get.
They're not related in any kind of meaningful way. So,
right.
So that happened, and I was texting Jonathan about this because we're both film nerds, and we're the biggest film nerds that we know. So we texted about this stuff, and that turned into me, I think, saying something along the lines of, "At least we know who the best Hepburn is." And Jonathan was, "Right, we do." And I was like, "Katharine," and Jonathan was like, "No, wait, I think you mean Audrey," and hence Hepburn v. Hepburn. And of course, I think, as we've established and repeated to the point where we're probably sick of saying it, they're both great. We don't have anything against the other one. We just love our own Hepburn better than the other Hepburn, and that's okay. And speaking of my own Hepburn, I want to talk today about the second half of Katharine Hepburn's career. This is the first movie that, in fact, I might even say that this movie kind of draws the line between the first half and the second half of Katharine Hepburn's career. In the 30s and the 40s, she was kind of a young starlet. She was in her 20s and her 30s, and then she kind of crosses the line to being in her 40s, and up and up and up, and she was making movies into her 80s. But the second half of her career was even more successful than the first half of her career, which is shocking because until fairly recently, and still not entirely true for everybody, being an aging actress wasn't really a very successful vocation. A lot of starlets would reach a certain age and kind of fall off the map. They would get married. They would move into a different line of work. A lot of them tragically would end up dying in some way. See the You Must Remember the series on dead blondes in Hollywood. But it was very, very rare for somebody to do what Katharine Hepburn did, which is transition successfully from being a young starring lead female actress into being a middle-aged and then elderly starring lead female actress, which is brilliant. In fact, she won 4 Oscars throughout her career. One she won for her third movie ever in 1933, Morning Glory. The other 3 she wins in the later half of her career after she's 60 or so. The first of which, or the second Oscar overall, the first of which when she's older is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. The last one is On Golden Pond, and I don't remember which one is in the middle. But of course, there's a bunch of really significant, really important performances in there, including The Lion in Winter, in which she plays her own relative, her own great times 26 grandmother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, in which she just becomes a better and better actress as she ages and continues a really strong career late in life until... she's even making TV movies, not very good ones because it's the 90s, but whatever. Pretty close until she finally passes away, sadly, on this side of the millennial line even. And I just think that's incredible. And, the past couple weeks while we've been prepping for this episode, I've watched through a lot of Katharine Hepburn canon, some early films, but a lot of which are her older films. And I can't recommend them highly enough. To go check out some of those older ones, especially, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, The Lion in the Winter, On Golden Pond, which is also Henry Fonda's last film. I think I mentioned that earlier. All really great films from an actress who didn't lose a step as she got older and just kept getting better and better.
Yeah, and to bring in the kind of tail end of Audrey Hepburn's career, since we are wrapping up the series, this was not the end of Hepburn's career either. She goes on to do several other notable projects. We already talked about My Fair Lady, which comes out the next year after Charade. Also How to Steal a Million, Wait Until Dark, and a couple others. We actually talked about her final film in the first episode of this podcast, and that was Always, directed by Steven Spielberg, where she literally plays an angel. What a more fitting way to end your Hollywood career.
Yeah, and if you're wondering whether or not we fired shots at each other about the Hepburn versus Hepburn thing during the making of that first episode, we did.
Yeah, we did. I can't remember if any of them made it to the podcast, but
probably not.
Go check it out anyway.
While we were still trying to figure out how to podcast.
Yeah, what we're exactly.
How do I talk?
Right. Yep.
Good times. Good times.
We still have trouble talking. Don't.
Yeah, that never goes
like
away.
we don't.
Yeah.
But
even voice actors have multiple takes, guys.
Yeah, but towards the end of Audrey Hepburn's acting career, she starts doing more charity work, and she does a lot of work for UNICEF, and actually receives the Presidential Medal of Freedom to recognize that. And she has like a statue at UNICEF and stuff like that. So that's something that we don't talk about a whole lot is actors' activity outside of their Hollywood career. But Audrey Hepburn definitely had a notable one. And also, as long as we've already acknowledged our semi kind of journey through Cary Grant's career, this is kind of Cary Grant's last notable role. He does 2 more films after this, but this is really his kind of his last hurrah. And I kind of think about I actually found an article that discusses this to some extent, the fact that Charade can almost be considered like the end of the golden age of Hollywood. We have these 2 actors and the whole cast of like bad guys and stuff. I mean, you've got a ton of these actors that worked all through the golden age. And as we come to The African Queen, where Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart are coming back after a short absence from Hollywood, and the next 10 years or so, the studio system is starting to collapse. And so these films and the films in between these 2 films kind of represent the end of a certain era of Hollywood. And then over the next decade or 2 after Charade, we start seeing the rise of blockbusters and the American new wave of film. And so as we kind of end this series, it's also an interesting look at the end of a whole era in cinema history, and seeing that with these 2 films that star so many actors from this great era of film history.
Yeah, totally right. It is a fitting way to go out on the Hepburn versus Hepburn series, which has been a joy to do, and a joy to talk about 2 of our favorite actresses for hours on end. Such a long time, guys.
Go check out our first 2. Obviously, you're probably a little bit lost if you haven't yet.
Yeah, of course. Go check out those ones. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. We hope you enjoy Hepburn movies as much as we do. And we hope you continue to enjoy classic films in general, expanding your film knowledge and coming along with us as we continue to journey down the path of studying movies, because it's fun and we're movie nerds. And what are we going to be talking about next week, Jonathan?
Well, as we talk about Hollywood's history, one of the things that we have to acknowledge about this current era of Hollywood is that Hollywood loves to continue things that it's already done and that people liked. And so we are going to devote a whole episode to sequel movies, movies that are jumping off of a first in a trilogy or more, because Hollywood can't even stop at trilogies anymore. And we have a very
quadrilogies, Jonathan. Quadrilogies.
Yeah, that is. And then quadrilogies don't even end. It's just
we split the last book into 2
extended universes, and it just keeps going on and on and on. So we have a very interesting set of movies for next time, 2 of which we have seen, and we decided to pick one sequel to a series that neither of us have seen the first movie of.
I have no idea how that's gonna go.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting, because next time we're going to kick off with Rambo First Blood Part 2 from 1985. Neither of us have seen Rambo First Blood Part 1, so we will see how well it holds up on its own.
So really, isn't it at that point, once you're on Part 2, isn't that Second Blood?
Second Blood? Yeah, I don't know.
At least it's Second Blood.
Maybe it's like when you take the Band-Aid off, but it's not totally done bleeding. So.
I'll take my complaint up with history, I guess.
And then we're gonna follow that up with The Matrix Reloaded from 2003.
Jonathan's favorite movie.
Yeah, no. The less acclaimed sequel to The Matrix. And finally, a sequel to a film that we have covered on the podcast before, and that is The Dark Knight, 2008. Considered one of the greatest comic book films, one of the greatest films in its own right, apart from...
Typically the best of the trilogy itself.
Yes, often the best of the trilogy. So that will be a really great one to talk about, and I'm sure that we have a lot of people who have been waiting for this. Aaron Johnson.
Aaron Johnson.
So that's what we've got in store for you guys next time.
Somewhere, because we record this ahead of time, somewhere Aaron Johnson just felt a shiver go down his spine.
Yeah.
He doesn't know why, but he will.
He saw a little symbol in the sky with a microphone, and he knew that we were talking about Batman.
Is that how it works? That's how we get guests on our podcast?
Yeah. I don't know. I just call
That's
a red phone
now.
and
That's
Aaron
how it
picks
works.
up.
We've got to buy a spotlight, Jonathan. Thanks for saying that. There goes a lot of money.
A spotlight and a red dial phone.
Okay, guys. That's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next time.
All right, see ya. Remember to keep your waveforms healthy.
Some side effects may include
Peaking.
garbling, static, logarithmic. I don't know. I'm just making
Flang
shit up.
and wah-wah. Wait, was it flange? I don't know.
Wow, 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 wow.
I just edit a podcast
wow,
every other week.
wow.
I don't know what I'm doing.
Wow.